Dove's class 74. We are on page 40, almost finishing section 6 of semiology and metaphysics. We were discussing the idea of calling upon the name of God. How in calling upon the name of God, it would be similar to how I would call upon my friend's name. I see my friend in public, I say, hello, how are you? I call his name, right? Because I want to get his attention. So before saying hello, how are you? I'm going to call his name, right? So I say, hey, Billy, what's up? And he turns around and says, hello, how are you? Right? So that's calling upon the name of God. Now I want to continue reading page 40. Finally, to further dispel the notion that there may be any element of coercion, the scripture states that only because God himself had previously called upon his name, invoking his name brings a response. So again, one of the fundamental points of Am Yisrael, of the Torah, is that we don't manipulate God, right? That's among the pagan religions, among the Gentiles, is manipulation of God. And that's why magic plays such a prominent role, because through magic you manipulate and you govern the gods. In Torah we call upon God, and you remember we said that because God prayed, we have the right to pray to him. Remember we brought the Gemara last time. So meaning God is inviting us to pray to him. It's a choice. So our prayer doesn't force God, right? Our prayer is a linguistic communication, first to second person. And in every linguistic communication, there's free will, there's choice. I can ask you to do something and you can say no or say yes, right? You don't have to accept it, but you may accept it, right? So that's what we were saying. So also in the case, so in order to further reinforce the fact that calling God's name is not like calling, the magical names of other deities, right? And therefore controlling those other deities. Brother, when we call upon the name of God, it's because God called upon his own name, thereby inviting us to call upon his name. So again, it's a choice. God is saying, I choose to enter into this dialogue, right? I invite you to address me, where you're going to be the first person speaking to me and calling upon me. I'm making the invitation, where in this week's parasha, the Torah says, "B'chol makom asher azkir et shemi abo elecha uberachticha." You know what the pasuk says? Any place where I will mention my name, I will come and I will bless you. So here, in all places where I shall mention my name, I shall come to you and I shall bless you. Characteristically, so why is it b'chol makom asher azkir et shemi? I will mention my name. It will be b'chol makom asher tazkir. You will mention my name. I will bless you. So the idea is, of course, we're mentioning God's name. We're the ones calling upon God, but it's only because God symbolically called upon his name that we have the right to call upon his name, and it becomes a rule that God establishes in the universe. One may call upon my name. Here, I'm doing it. Now you can do it. You understand? Characteristically, the Aramaic translation render it. In every place that you will mention my name in prayer, I will come and bless you. So the Targum Ankelos explains it. Right? Here we see that the Targum is reflecting the way the pasuk is understood, right? Even though grammatically the pasuk is azkira shemi, right? Through God, the whole universe is semiologically connected. So we saw that there was a semiological relationship between God and man, in so much as we can address God through speech, and God will address us back, right? So that's a semiological relationship, but also the universe is connected semiologically. God maintains a semiological relation not only with man, but with all of creation. And how do we know this? How do we know? Where's the semiological relationship? So we know that there's a semiological relationship because we call upon God's name. And we invite him, because he invited us, we now can call upon God's name and we can have a dialogue with God. Where in the universe do you see this? At the end of each of the first 3 days of creation, God calls what he had created. Like it says, Vayikra Elohim la'or yom, Vayikra. God calls. It's a semiological idea. That's almost like speech. This calling is a summons, implying total submission of what was created. So in Vayikra Elohim la'or yom, what it means there to call, because there is no dialogue there. There's not going to be a back and forth dialogue. In the case of man, there's a dialogue. Right? So God calls upon his name to us so that we can call upon God's name to him. Right? So he's inviting us to this dialogue. That's the idea of free will. That's exactly why man has free will, because he always has a choice whether to enter into the dialogue or not to enter into the dialogue. God's not going to force anybody to do that. But in the case of creation, God calls upon creation symbolically to illustrate the fact that God is the sovereign. God has complete governance over all that happens. So he calls upon creation, not like he calls upon man, because man can choose to enter or not enter into the dialogue. Creation has no possibility of having a dialogue with God. So when God, God is summoning the light, right? And calling it Yom, right? So you see the difference between free will in the case of man and submission in the case of the universe. As a creator, God calls his creatures and summons them to execute his orders. So God is calling the light. Light! It's daytime. Come out. And of course, by Hiyah, and the light comes out. The light has no choice. As a creator, God calls his creatures and summons them to execute his orders. Yeah. This idea was used by Isaiah to explain the special calling of God to Israel. It's a beautiful pasuk in Yeshaya Hanavi, and in this pasuk, when exhorting Israel to follow God's summons, so the idea here is that Yeshaya Hanavi is asking the Jewish people to listen to God's calling upon them. God is summoning the Jewish people, right? So in the context of that, there's a beautiful pasuk. I'm going to read it to you, if I can find it. Give me just one moment, I'm sorry. Yeshaya Hanavi, I want to read it in the text itself. And I think I'm getting closer. First of all, let me read what my father says here. So when exhorting Israel to follow God's summon, Isaiah points out how the rest of the universe stands up in readiness. So all of creation, it's almost like, somebody standing before the king, and the king calls upon the person, and the person is ready to follow the commandment of the king, right? So the entire universe stands up in readiness and volition to obey him. And the pasuk says, "Listen to me, O Jacob." I'm going to read it now in the Hebrew. If you give me one moment, I have to, microscopic letters I can't see. Okay, now I should be able to see it. Okay. And here it is. Shema Elai Yaakov v'Yisrael Mekorai. Listen to me, O Israel, O Jacob, and Israel, the one that I called. You see the word Mekorai, milashon likro, to call. So God calls upon Israel the way he called upon the all, right? Israel Mekorai, right? I am he, I am the first. Reading now in the text. Ani hu, ani rishon, af ani aharon, right? I also am the last. Because of course God is above time, because he created time, so he's first and last at the same time. My hand also had laid the foundation of the earth. The pasuk says, "Af yadi yaseda eres v'mini tepeha shamayim," and my right hand spanned the heavens. Tepeha shamayim, right? Koreh ani alehem ya'amdu yachdav. I call to them. He calls to the heavens, right? They stand up together, right? What does it mean they stand up together? The Eres and the heavens, they stand up ready to follow God's instructions. Unlike Israel, that has Bechira Hofshit, not to follow God's instructions, but the metaphor is very beautiful. They follow my instruction. Look at the majesty of the universe that God created. Look at his ministers. Look at his army, right? And they're all there ready, standing to follow God's instructions. And you, Israel, I gave you instructions, and you have the choice to follow my instructions, to join this majestic beauty. Choose to do it. Nobody's going to force you, right? Doni Yitzhak Banel commented on the last verse, and here's what Doni Yitzhak Banel says about this. It means that since I made them ex nihilo, I could do with them as I will. And at the instant that I call upon them to execute my will, they stand up before me, ready to obey like servants. So, because God created the universe yesh me'ayin, right? There was nothing. God created everything, including the rules that governed the universe. And because of that, God has complete dominion over the universe. Rabbi Abraham Lanyado observed that to call, koreh, to call, is a atemporal participle, implying thereby a continuous act of calling upon. Koreh, it's not at a specific moment. Koreh ani alehem, but rather God is always koreh. From a grammatical perspective, that's called the atemporal participle, because it's happening all the time. That's like you say, the running waters of the river, right? The waters of the river are always running, right? So it's not present, past, or future. It's atemporal. Reflecting a position similar to that of David Nieto, Lanyado interpreted standing up as the effect of God's continuous calling. So because God is always calling, remember it's atemporal, God calls upon, God is always calling, that's why they're standing, right? Things stand up in the sense that they are what they are because God calls upon them continuously. So there is a continuous calling by God to the creations. God is always calling Yehi Or, and then the sun rises in the daytime, right? Right? A Hoshech, right, is Laila, at nighttime. So God's calling is present and ubiquitous throughout the creation. It's a beautiful idea, right? Similarly, his grandson would be Levi Lanyado. My father, but had such great bekiut. You know, my father wrote this book well before people knew of these hachamim, and today we have computers and we have so many different resources, digital resources. But my father he knew all this well before any of these digital resources. Who heard of Rabbi Avraham Lanyado? Right? Who heard of Rabbi Levi Lanyado, the grandson of Rabbi Avraham Lanyado? Right? A tremendous bekiut. Anyway, similarly, his grandson, Rabbi Levi Lanyado, 17th century, noted that together, it says Ya'amdu Yachdav, they stand up together, means not only conjointly, but also simultaneously, right? So together doesn't mean that they all stand up, but they all stand up simultaneously, which is to say there's a certain order in the different systems in the universe and everything aligns perfectly, right? One of the wonders that evolution can never explain is why are all these separate systems so perfectly aligned? Evolution has no answer for that, of course. But we say Ya'amdu Yachdav. God says so. Thus, the sense of the verse is simultaneously. At God's calling, the whole of creation stands up. So, as God calls, immediately with the calling, the creation stands up to do His will. It becomes what it is through the calling of God. Isaiah wanted to convey to the people of Israel the following idea. Look up and see how heavens and earth and all that which they contain do not hesitate in executing my word and fulfilling it, but they hasten to execute the word of God. And you, why don't you listen to me likewise to do my will? Within the cosmic, that's the meaning of the pasuk, right? And God doesn't force himself. He asks us to do his will. Ultimately, we have Bahira. Within the cosmic semiological system, man stands alone, not only in his power to refuse to respond to God's call. Somebody calls my name, Rabbi. I can choose to ignore, choose to walk away. Maybe I'm busy, maybe I have something better to do, maybe I don't want to reply for whatever reason. But also Israel can say no to God. They have Bahira Hofshet. But also in his faculty to call upon the name of God, that is to initiate a dialogue with God. The cosmos cannot initiate a dialogue with God. We can. That's incredible. As we shall see, this involves man's ability for intersubjective communication. But that will be a future chapter.